I went into film school wanting to be a writer. I double majored in journalism and knew that was something I was doing from the jump. But I knew I also wanted to direct what I wrote. So it was this weird, like, okay, what's the most like these things? And I thought I wanted to maybe be an editor, because that's like rewriting and revision. But then learned that like being on set was what brought me the most joy. And then people kind of identified me as a potential production designer, I think based off of having pink hair at the time. But yeah, I think after I did an advanced, which was like the course at NYU where you make a thesis film and essentially like the directors of the year decide they're gonna, put all of their resources into making these thesis films, I knew after that process that I wanted to make a feature. And I looked at other people that had come out of the school or were on similar paths and tried to like model something off of them. I had worked as an art director on a feature, and I was like, okay, like he was 27 when he did this. This is a good goal. I'll make my first feature when I'm 27. That's realistic. Obviously, people have very different resources, very different career paths and journeys. So when I set out to like come up with an idea for a feature, I didn't know what that would be. For Leche, that was the first idea that really excited me. I didn't know how I was going to put that together. Yeah, I knew that there were different parts that would lead me to making my first feature, applying to grants and labs like Sundance and Tribeca and IFP Week. Like those were all things I knew people had done in the past that I admired. And so I was kind of like, hey, let me try this. I know there's a lot of rejection ahead, but like I don't know any other way to do this but trial and error. Yeah.
How do you handle the rejection and the setbacks along the way?
Yeah. I think I try to pivot and like put my creative energy into other projects. If one is like being faced with boundaries or like obstacles at that time. I've been really lucky with Leche that once we got into the Sundance labs, which I truly think like I had to lean into collaborators that had a connection to Sundance. And I think, yeah, there's so many times when these organizations, just find your work out of the blue, out of a pile, and are like, this is something special. I recently had the opportunity to work with the Blacklist, and one of my scripts got a really great rating on their system that's like very like, you never know who's going to read, and one person could give you like a trash rating and someone could be like, this is the best thing I've ever read. It's not, yeah. So like, okay. And so that I truly was like, oh, you don't know my credentials, you don't know what I've been through, this is just purely this material speaking for itself. And I think when you're submitting shorts and all this stuff, you think, hey, my work will just speak for itself and that's enough. And something I've learned over the last 15 years throughout school and now after graduating is that, yeah, your work and talent can speak for itself, but like truly you're not going to be able to do anything without a community rallying behind you. And that sometimes there are these gatekeepers, whether or not we like them, and that sometimes there's these people that align with you and the stories you're telling that have access to things, and you need to be able to find a way to find those collaborators. And I think that was like a hard pill to swallow in a way in the beginning, to be like, wait, like I can't just go and like have the work speak for itself. But I was able to find the right collaborators that really would sit through the rejection with me. And having those people in my camp has been like really important to this whole rejection, acceptance. It's gonna happen, it's not, start, stop. That is like financing a feature, especially in the independent space, especially with a child lead, minority led, very niche kind of genre bending thing that's not so commercial. So I would say that while I was like having momentum from that, I would lean into that. And then when there was rejection, I tried to figure out like, okay, save money right now, take all of the art production work on a show. I was an on-set dresser on this show, Random Acts of Flyness. That came at a time when I was like, we gotta wait and see who's gonna come to us with this money. I'm tired of rewriting and editing this thing. It feels good to me right now. I just need feedback. So I was like trying to think of what was the most practical in those stages of like things aren't going the way I want them to, or there's not the momentum I need. Or like if I then have another idea that I've been sitting on, which I try to keep that flow going, I pivot and I work on something else because it can only inform that other thing that I've been prioritizing in the past. I wrote another feature while Lecce was in its like, let's see if it gets money phase. And that is what got into the Blacklist Labs. I truly feel like that's also helped me get this project that I shot in the DR in November, because it had similar themes, which was just cosmic and not like neither here and there. But yeah, I think putting your energy into different pockets can really help when you're being rejected. And like you can, it doesn't even have to be in your field. Like I have like signed up for the 2020 marathon that got canceled. I'm probably going to be running it this year, or I'm signed up for it if everything goes as planned. And that was something that was like, I have control over this. It's like kind of finding what you can control and accepting what you don't have control over that allows me to deal with rejection. Yeah.
Where do you think the ideas for you come from?
Yeah. For me, ideas, I mean, so much of my work comes out of my roots, like my background as a first-gen American. My mother's Dominican, came to the States when she was 13, so she was pretty young. My dad's Guyanese, came to the States in his mid-20s, which was like a different experience. But my mother came here not speaking English, had to go through the New York school system. My dad comes from an English-speaking country and had some family here. So yeah, I think so many of my ideas are rooted off of who are my protagonists and who do I want to tell and voice a story for or give a voice to, and can connect to and do right by. Obviously, all these characters are not me and are not my experience as this first-gen girl who grew up in the suburbs of America and then came to NYU. Like, they're very different protagonists. And I always try to align with people that are part of those experiences in my research, which I kind of lean into my journalism background too, like to be authentic. But what I love about film and production design also helped me with is like world building. And I think putting these very real, authentic voices and characters into spaces that we haven't seen them in is what's important. And so all of my ideas kind of stem out of like something that's intrigued me that exists in reality, and then seeing it in a way that maybe we haven't seen before. I think it's hard because throughout my process of rejection, I've seen things that I have been gestating come to be in the zeitgeist in another way that like sometimes it's scary to be like, oh, that's my film that I've been working on, which is told through this character's perspective. It's so close to the thing that I've been making for 5 years. Now no one's gonna want to make my thing. That happens a lot. I think you can try to be as original as you can, but like we're all, you know, dreaming up these stories, and there's no way when certain issues or things are important that other things aren't going to come up and other people aren't going to be working on similar materials. And like that's what happened with this project in the DR. It was centered around sex tourism on the island. I had for 2 years been working on a different script. This was just like an idea. They had just started an outline. I was like, I have a finished script. And they're like, well, we have this idea and we're very set in what this is going to be. And I kind of was like, well, I know this world enough. I've talked to the people. I've lived in certain situations where I figured it out. I care a lot about the young women that are a part of this, these communities, and what could be said about this. And so I had an idea that was similar, and then this world happened to correspond to that. And it worked out in my favor that I had been like coming up with ideas that lived in that space.
What do you think is the importance of having that kind of story have an audience?
Yeah. I think the importance is visibility and representation. I think there's been a lot of talk in the film industry and television, media in general about like representation, and the D word, diversity, I think gets thrown around a lot. And I've grown to kind of hate the word diversity in a way, because I think there's so much fronting in terms of like people wanting to do right by these initiatives and things. And I've benefited immensely from like having initiatives around diversity. Now specifically, obviously there's specific communities. Like I just got an incredible grant to make a short film through LALIF, the Los Angeles International Latino Film Festival, and Netflix. That's specifically for Afro-Latinx creators and indigenous Latinx creators, because people are realizing that like even within these diverse communities, which is like, are you Latinx? What does that look like? What countries are represented in that? That there are communities within that. Within any diaspora, there's more depth and everyone's not the same. So I think that's the value, is like acknowledging like everyone, like if a group has historically been underrepresented, like all of those people aren't the same within that group. And so I can only tell the stories of a limited few. I can truly only tell my story and perspective from that, and I can get feedback from all my other collaborators and have their voices come together to create this story. But the value in telling these stories is that like there's endless perspectives from historically underrepresented voices. And so like just adding anything to that is really powerful, and people feeling seen or heard. Yeah.
It's cool to think about the collaborative part too, because I feel like it's not just you, it is the collaborators and the actors and everyone that you get involved.
Yeah, I mean, no director is anything without their crew, and film is a tricky art form because it's a business. It's like when you make an independent film, you open an LLC. That's how you go into it. You get investors. It's like an equity financing structure with independent film. You hire a crew that you pay like a company. There's a hierarchy that is very intense to navigate. There's this, and like to that end, it's like you need to have the right people at the top. And if it's at the top and you're not thinking, I mean, I truly think that, it would be great to be like, hey, here's this like communal, we're all just in this together. And there are certain things of the structure of film that has just been set up in a way that's like, you could blow it all up and be like, hey, we're going to do this in this way. That's thinking of it differently, but I have like up until this point, like done it in the structures that exist. And I think the ways to kind of break that down in a way is to run your sets with immense, like just acknowledge everyone, and that like you cannot do anything without every single person in whatever tier of like the traditional filmmaking model they're in. And that almost the people that are like carrying, like being paid the least are carrying the most weight. I think we see that in terms of how people are paid in the entertainment industry in general. And just being really gracious and like listening to all your collaborators, because they have so much to say and contribute to this vision. And in terms of like obstacles you might face in the process of production or in development or whatnot, it's your collaborators that are going to solve those things for you more often than not. Like you don't have the answers to everything specifically as a director. And that's important to acknowledge. It truly is like team building. There's a director who did this film Sila in the Spades called Thierry Chapeau, and I really loved at the beginning of her film. It wasn't like a film by Thierry Chapeau, it was a film by all of us. And I had never seen that before. I mean, there's so much truth, and that just speaks volumes itself of like truly what it is.
Do you ever think about if it could be different, like if you didn't have to rely on money and funding and things like that? I mean, it's kind of wishful thinking, but I think it's kind of fun to think about sometimes.
If you, I think I've met in different stages of like the filmmaking journey. I've been on like people who are, I guess it's hard because it's where people are in their careers and things need to be sustainable, especially if you're living in a city like New York City where everything costs so much money, and you're paying insane rent or whatever it is and living with a bunch of roommates still. Things have to be sustainable, and you really need to respect these collaborators in that sense. It's like you can't be like so gracious and all about collaboration and not realize people's worth and value. That being said, I do think I try to extend whatever I can offer if I'm in a position to, because I acknowledge that like everyone's not making Apple commercials, everyone's not being backed by a Netflix or a streamer in development on a series. Even projects that I have worked on with streamers that I think have like all the money in the world, I'm like in a coordinating or head of a department position where suddenly people are being low-balled, and it's like, why does this exist? And I'm not in charge of the financing. And yeah, all this to say, yeah, I think about it a lot. What could the industry look like if everything wasn't so expensive? But then I think of the economy and the greater things that come into play, and it just feels, again, out of my control in terms of like, yeah, people need to support themselves. And I think the best thing we can do is try and find ways to support ourselves. And then collaborators that are like, hey, I have this space and time to make this thing that we just all feel really is important, and I'm going to carve out this time, and I'm going to be paid less than I usually would pay, and we're going to exchange like either like our physical help, or like I'm going to production design something for you in the future, or like our connections. So yeah, I think there's ways to work around that by finding a community. But yeah, when you ask people for favors, I think there's also limitations to those favors. There's a point where you're like, okay, now I need to pay you your worth, or you just need to be honest if you're not in a position to offer those things.
Yeah, it's a tough balance.
Yeah.
Especially in the way society's set up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's a larger like, oh, I want to be a filmmaker and make art for nothing, and it's like, yeah, it's a much larger question. Yeah.
Do you ever wish you did a different
career
path, or different, even a different art form?
Right now, no, and I guess in the last 5 years, no. I would say I've definitely had low points where I think maybe I focused on the wrong things, or I've considered that. Like I pitched for $1 million last June with this like AT&T Untold Stories and Tribeca thing that like is like Shark Tank for filmmakers. And we didn't get the money. And I remember going into it after 5 years of trying to make this film and thinking like, there's a good chance we don't get this money. Like, it doesn't, like, all these projects are so different. It has nothing to do with our worth. We've made it this far. But I remember thinking, like, if we don't get this money, I don't know that I want to make this film anymore. And this was, like, up until, like, this had been, like, everyone who knew me knew about this film, whether or not I wanted them to, because of support it had received. And I think that getting rejection from $1 million is about as close as you're going to get to your goal, and probably the lowest when you don't get that, which it's like incredible to have that opportunity, but was definitely like I had recasted my lead at that point. I had a little girl I was really excited about. She had aged out of the role. I was like, this girl's going to not be able to play this in 2 years. Like, it had been a lot. It was a very specific role. And I think in that process, I was like, I wasted maybe 6 years of my life on this, which is a lot when you're young. Like, I acknowledge I'm a young filmmaker and I'm just starting out. But I also am like, my lead who I'd recasted was 7. The project had been around for 6 years. It's like, that girl was 1 when I came up with this idea. Like, that put it in so much context of like what it is. And filmmakers take a really long time getting projects off the ground. Established filmmakers, it was like 20 years sitting on a script that no one wanted to make, even though they have all of the like validation in the world. So I think in that way, it's like sometimes hard, and like you can be like, is this the right career path? Like, even when you've made it, you haven't made it. So, but I truly love being a filmmaker, and I guess I have a hard enough head that I've continued to be fighting to be a writer-director, and I like being a production designer. I like being a freelancer and having the freedom. I'm someone who travel is incredibly important. It's more important than money is seeing the world and like experiences. And so I am someone who needs that freedom in my schedule. And I very briefly had like a 9 to 5 for 3 months and then left it to like focus to art direct an indie feature. And I think I couldn't do anything else that wasn't giving me freedom. Maybe I could have been a journalist and gone down that route. I don't think it would have paid me any more than being a freelance production designer. And now being like a director and leaning into that, figuring out what that's going to look like. Knowing how much debt I'm in some days, I'm like, is there something else in the industry I could be doing? I could certainly full-time be production designing, and I think I'd be much more comfortable. But I think following your dreams is sacrifice. Like sacrifice is at the center of all of that, depending on what your dream is, I guess. But even going to med school or something, that's a sacrifice financially and time-wise. And those are careers that pay a lot, law being a lawyer or a doctor. So I think there's always going to be sacrifice on one end. And my family sacrificed a lot coming to this country, and that's always at the center of any like first gen or immigrant story. And it's certainly a center of mine. So I don't regret my path. Yeah.
It stuck out to me when you said that it's like you felt sometimes like you wasted that time, but it seems like it kind of permeated all your decisions and like even your interactions, like networking and things like that throughout that whole period.
Yeah, I personally right now would not say I wasted that time being where I am literally in this moment. But I think like after something like what feels like an immense rejection, which I think was also a huge acceptance to be in that position to pitch for $1 million, is like people lifting you up so much. And I acknowledge that with every yes I get that doesn't ultimately pan out to that like final thing that I needed it to be. Because yes, it's like all these building blocks. Like I had the opportunity the last 3 years to talk to like NYU's Tisch freshman class about my process as an emerging artist. And when I first spoke to them, I felt like, what do I have to say? Like I've spent 6 years, or at that point, I guess it was 4 or 5 years trying to finance a feature. I can talk a lot about rejection and pivoting and determination. And I realized very quickly from everyone who did come back to me and was like, I was really inspired by your talk, that like what I thought was like this incredibly like bummer conversation about like, hey, good luck. When, I mean, a freshman at NYU, you like have so much hope, or like I would hope you do. But people were like inspired by that, and that spoke volumes to like maybe things that I wasn't seeing about my own journey, and that like this was all building upon something. And that's what it is for most people. Like there's all these quotes and like memes like, oh, you don't see like what happened. Like anyone that's an overnight success is like 30 years of work or whatever it is. And truly that's it. Like the fact that my producer Sterling Ramirez found me and sent that email was all of the work I had been doing for Leche, and my name being thrown around, and maybe people not financing that film, but them being like, hey, this person's in the ether and they exist. And me then connecting and having like us being on the same page about our visions for something and the stories we wanted to tell. And then it was crazy to have been struggling here to finance something in the States, and then been given the opportunity to make something finally in my like mother's like home country. That was an incredibly emotional and like challenging experience at the same time. And I think, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been building everything. So if you asked me now if it was all a waste, I'd say no. If you asked me like an hour after I got rejected from $1 million, I would have been like, what have I been doing? And like, also, we're so inundated by social media, and when people succeed nowadays, when people fail, a little less. I was really transparent in my talks at NYU. I had like a section that was rejection in the artistic process, and it was like all these rejection emails. And I was like, I often feel like I'm rejected after I think like I'm about to make it. There's something that's like, never mind. And yeah, it's just ebbs and flows. And so I've acknowledged that like, if you're really like set and like having something happen for yourself, you can figure it out. I truly believe. But yeah, it's hard, and there is some luck to it. Timing is massive, and so that's why I'm like, nothing is a waste, essentially. Yeah.
If you could see yourself, since you were talking to freshmen, what do you think your freshman in college self would think of where you're at now?
Well, I was just looking at a post I had made when I was home, and I had this list that was like 5 goals, like life goals, that I think I made when I was 15. So that's like even before. And it was like, get a film in Sundance. My YouTube name was like Future Sundance Film. So like there's a little bit of a Sundance obsession, and have not done that yet. And this film we're not submitting to Sundance because of timing is everything, deadlines. But I have been supported by Sundance, which is really exciting. I think little me would be stoked about that. See, the Aurora Borealis was a thing. I was just in Iceland. We saw it. It wasn't exactly what I thought it would be. I need to see it again. But I've done that. Yeah, directing a feature. Speaking 2 languages was part of it. I'm on that journey still with Spanish. I've taken a lot of French. We'll see how that goes. I think making work, again, that transcends boundaries, can kind of help if I'm like speaking it within communities. And I mean, I guess I'm fluent in English, but I think my goal is outside of English, so speaking 3 languages fluently. I wanted to be a roadie for Warped Tour. I don't think Warped Tour exists anymore, so that one might have to be tabled. Maybe I'll make a film about a roadie and that'll cover that, or a series. I know there was a film about roadies that did exist. There were so many like weird things that I did do, and I think, I mean, so many people believe in these vision boards or whatnot, and I think there's something to it. I don't do that. But I think being able to, I'm a very visual person. They're really cerebral, they're really visual, like people emotional, like in these different realms. And I'm really visual. I think I've kind of like seen, like writing a list like that and being like, these are things that are really important to me. Who has done this or been able to do something like this? And just living in your truth of what those goals are is really important. So I think freshman year at Gabby would be pretty stoked, pretty hyped and excited too for me. Yeah.